Hello, my name is Kristen Bolden, and I want to welcome you to The Other Side of History. Now, in this talk from our book, Triumphant by B.G. Wilkinson, that we've been going through, I want to give you the history of a man named Columbanus. Now, he is not to be confused with the man Columba that we have already talked about. Now, Columba was the man who started the school, if you remember, in Scotland called Iona. Now, Columbanus, and actually some write his name Columban, he started training schools in France, Germany, and Italy. Now, Columbanus started a school there in Italy, and it is called Bobbio. And today, the school is called St. Columban's Abbey. Now, what remains of the abbey is now used as a municipal school. The Roman Church followed the same procedure with Columbanus as she did with Patrick and Columba. They have claimed Columbanus as one of their own, and they've actually labeled him as one of their saints. However, here is the story of the man Columbanus as given in the book Truth Triumphant. Columbanus lived from 543 to 615. And was born into the environment where the best of the Christian culture had been preserved and organized and nurtured by men like Patrick and Columba. Now, Columbanus, he loved this scholarly atmosphere, and he was said to be learnt in all the wisdom of his day. However, like Moses in the court there of Pharaoh, he had a masterly self-discipline, and he was devoted to the study of the scriptures. He was also like Moses in that he was very handsome. Now, Acts chapter 7, verse 20, it says of Moses, "At that time Moses was born, and was exceedingly fair, and nourished up in his father's house for 3 months." So from this text, we can see that even as a little baby, Moses was exceedingly handsome. Now, Columbanus was also noted for his exceptionally good looks. He was said to be tall, muscular, and very handsome. His biographer quoted him as having a fine figure and splendid color. So perhaps his coloring was kind of like King David, which was said to have also been handsome and with a ruddy complexion. So actually, we can read that in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 12. It says, "And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he." So here we have speaking of David. Now, Columbanus's biographer, he says that he aroused against him the lust of lascivious maidens. And we know that this also happened to the handsome Joseph. Genesis chapter 39:6 says, "And Potiphar left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person, and well favored." Now we know that Potiphar's licentious wife, she looked on the handsome and goodly person of Joseph and wanted him to sin against God and his master. So Columbanus, he was kind of like another Moses, David, and Joseph. Although he got much attention from the opposite sex, his desire was for being right with God and for spiritual things. He loved God's word, and he also loved sacred song. He also perfected his gift that was given to him of writing poetry. Now, he's not as well known as Caedmon, the one who we talked about in the last talk, but he was a poet. Now, Columbus's focus on spiritual things, it kept his mind from the lowlands, and it helped him to become a great leader there of the church in the wilderness. While at a place of learning there in Ireland, Columbanus, he heard stories of the wretched and moral condition of those further to the east in France. An apostolic spirit had actually burned within Columbanus as he heard these stories, especially of those from Gaul, France. He felt that he must go and evangelize France in the missionary spirit of the Celtic Christianity. So with that arrival of Columbanus in Gaul, it brought a dawn of a new day, not only to France, but for all of Europe. He created many centers of civilization and implanted the spirit of Christianity in the hearts of the people. The best in European civilization that we have today, we owe to the rebuilding there of Columbanus and his companions and his followers. When Columbanus got to France, the people had a form of religion, but no conception of true piety. They were not guided by principle, and were largely like the heathen around them. They were immoral and degraded. Columbanus and his associates did not seek to bring about reform through political might, but through the power of the love of God in their hearts. They convinced the people around them of true Christianity. Now, the French king, he actually held Columbanus and his learning in very high regard, and a battle began against the true Celtic Christianity and this corrupt and debasing Christianity that existed. The Pope at this time was Pope Gregory I. He's actually also called Pope Gregory the Great. Now, he held an immense hatred against the Celtic Church and those who wished to remain true to God's word. It was Pope Gregory I who was so incensed because many of the Christians in the city there of Rome were observing Saturday as the Sabbath. And so anyhow, he was, of course, angry about this. And in 602, he issued a bull, and it declared that when Antichrist would come, he would keep Saturday for the Sabbath. It's been said that the gulf between the Celtic Church and the Church there of Rome was greater than between Irish Christianity and paganism. Perhaps this was because paganism did not have access to the culture and the truth which the papacy claimed. The union of a Christian church with the state is more dangerous to liberty than even the union of paganism with the state. The opposition of the Church of Rome there to the work of Columbanus was a struggle between liberty and despotism. Considering the unrelenting hostility of the papacy to the Celtic Church, it was clear that one or the other of the two communions must either die or surrender. The stark contrast in the two churches was of learning. The papal church had an obvious lack of learning, and the Celtic Church had an abundance of learning. Now, Truth Triumphant says that the work done by the Irish missionaries has been credited to the Benedictine monks. Yet, as one historian says, the general belief that the Benedictines, who were the only rivals of the Irish missionaries in the period under review, were learnt men is totally erroneous. No branch of the Benedictines making learned studies their aim existed till the 17th century. Many of the kings, they embraced Columbanus and the Celtic Church. Both French and German kings, they treated him royally. However, there was one king of a country which later became part of Germany. He was married to kind of like a Jezebel, so to speak. Her name was Brunhilde. And in 575, she murdered her husband and charmed the son of his brother, he was also a king, to marry her. So when her grandson took the throne, she led him into a profligate life. The grandmother was afraid that her grandson would marry a queen, and this queen would displace her. So she tried her very best to keep her grandson into this life of vice. However, despite all of this, Brunhilde's grandson, he actually had a great respect for Columbanus, and he protected and defended him. Even while Columbanus was rebuking him and his dissolute grandmother for their evil ways. Now, these rebukes were not overlooked by Brunhilde, and she turned her rage and fury upon Columbanus. The colleges that Columbanus founded were persecuted, and she encouraged the Catholic bishops to attack the Celtic faith and to abolish Columbanus's system there of education. Yet, if you read about this lady, Brunhilde, from the mainstream history, you will read of a woman who is said to have been, according to the ideas of her time, a religious woman. They talk of her as building churches, monasteries, and hospitals, and of being a friend of some of the leading churchmen of her day. So, just kind of like that saying where they say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, it also seems true that one's frame on history is also in the eye of the beholder. Perhaps there are even some who would portray Queen Jezebel or even Herodias, the queen that had John the Baptist's head cut off, as being good women, according to the ideas of their time, religious women. For several years, Columbanus labored in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, leaving a string of missions to carry on the work that he had started. However, this papal pagan kind of conspiracy that was against him, it forced him to leave. So Columbanus, he was already past 70 years of age, yet he made his way over the towering Alps to the court of the king there of the Lombards. During this time, the Lombards, they were a Germanic tribe who ruled a kingdom in Italy. This region was a stronghold for the primitive Christian teachings. Columbanus was joyfully received, and the Celts and the Waldenses of Italy, they joined hands in spreading the gospel. The Lombards had followed the simpler and the more biblical Christianity of the Church of the East, and never had walked in the ways of the papacy. Columbanus, he refused to stay at the court of the Lombard king. He asked if he could have a place to plant a new center of learning. That was his great desire and goal, is to plant many centers of learning. So the king, he told Columbanus that in the locality of Bobbio, there was a ruined church. So the Lombards at this time, because they were not affiliated with the papacy, they were branded by Rome as Arians. Now, I don't know if this, it was because of this prejudice, against the Lombards that this church had been closed. But anyhow, the king said that Columbanus could establish a center there at Bobbio. Now, of Bobbio, it's been said, here the nucleus of what was to be the most celebrated library in Italy was formed by the manuscripts which Columban had brought from Ireland and the treaties of which he himself was the author. As has already been expressed, Bobbio became such a center for learning that later the Roman Church claimed the school and its founder as their own. Columbanus did not live much more than a year after he finished his work there at Bobbio. There was widespread grief there with his death, at his death. Columbanus had worked more than 30 years in arduous labor and had made an indelible impression upon the people there of France and Germany, Switzerland, and the Lombards. He had been loved by king and commoner alike. Of the Irish missionaries, it was said that modesty and sobriety, gentleness and mildness shone forth in them all. The evils of sloth and of unruly tempers were expelled. Pride and haughtiness were expedited by severe discipline. Scorn and envy were driven out by faithful diligence. So great was the strength of their patience, love, and mildness that no one could doubt that the God of mercy did dwell among them. It was said that at times Columbanus would retire apart and live for days by himself with his Bible as his only companion. Most likely it was the Bible that he himself had transcribed by his own hand while at the training school there in Ireland. He often had to trust God for food and for care against the elements of nature. Columbanus and the other Irish missionaries, they knew what suffering meant. Food was at times so scarce that they had to live on berries, even the bark of trees, and on whatever they could find that was edible upon the ground. It was said that Columbanus was looked upon as a prince over the wild beasts, and that when he came forth from his retreats, he was strengthened and refreshed for his labors. Now, although Bobbio, the school there that Columbanus established in Italy, is a famous school, Truth Triumphant says that it was the school that Columbanus established in France that proved to be the greatest and the most influential of his schools. Now, Columbanus's school that he established there in France is called Luxeuil, and it became the recognized spiritual capital of all the countries under the governments there of France. In the 7th century, this school, and I don't know if I'm saying it right, Luxeuil, was the most celebrated school in all of Christendom outside of Ireland. So Columbanus is a beautiful example of what God can do with a life that is surrendered to him. So at this time, if you have enjoyed this talk, I would just like to encourage you to click on that subscribe and that like button. And I just want to thank you for listening, and God bless.